direction appears to be less matter.
Point to demonstrable changes in populations like fruit flies and bacteria that they say demonstrate or prove their theory. You can take fruit flies that drop dead with a certain concentration of carbon tetrachloride and use less than a completely lethal dose to get rid of the most susceptible fruit flies, and after a few generations you have fruit flies that are almost living on carbon tetrachloride. Unfortunately, things like gonorrhea bacillus and some of the other nasties are behaving the same way towards penicillin. And this is very demonstrable. How do we view these demonstrations?
The question he's asked is, you see in both bacteria and insects, in fact, the idea that these are resistant to certain kinds of attack, and over generations you see essentially the resistance appear to improve. And I say appear to improve because that's exactly what it is. The genetic information in the fruit fly, or the genetic information in the bacteria, already exists. See, this is the contra, in a sense, to evolution. If evolution were true, you'd expect new information to come into existence. But in fact, you can demonstrate, and the best example is the peppered moth, and I'll use it in a second, that the material, the information already exists in the population. It's a matter of survival. We're back to the concept of natural selection, that the creatures that survive are the ones that fit best in the environment they're in. Let's use the peppered moth is a textbook case. You'll find it in almost all the evolutionary textbooks. The idea that we saw evolution take place in the peppered moth. In England, there's a moth called the peppered moth. And it's come in two varieties ever since man has observed it. The two varieties are a dark color and a light color. And the evolutionists tell us, well, see, what happened is evolution took place. We saw these light moths, and then as the Industrial Revolution happened, and all these substrates, all the things the moths would land on, the trees and the walls of the houses and stuff, became darkened by the coal soot. The dark ones survived, and the light ones did not. As a result, we saw evolution from light to dark moths. Well, the dark moths were always there. They just didn't survive well. But now that example no longer holds up, because what's happened is, with our anti-pollution measures, we've let those surfaces turn back light, and guess what happened? The light moths are surviving and the dark ones are disappearing. One of the things that happens in genetics, and this is just two genomes here, and I'm going to get a little technical with this, but I hope not too. Here's the parents, male and female. Here are the children. And the point I want to make is that in a single generation, depending upon what genes the child receives, the child may or may not have a loss of information. And that loss of information continues generation to generation, and eventually we get a lot of mistakes in our genes, a lot of loss of richness, and we tend to look like you and I. Let's follow that further. What I want to talk about here is random processes and information. And this is, let me just say a couple things about NASA first. You know, NASA's spending millions of dollars on a lot of different research, and this is one of the really interesting ones. There's a project called SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And SETI is essentially a process where they've got radio telescopes and they're looking out into space to see if an intelligence signal comes to us. Now, if they get a ... they will say, look at the intelligence in outer space. There's life out there. But they look at the DNA molecule, which has a complex language system which is beyond anything we can even imagine. Our most sophisticated computers can't even yet deal with DNA. And they say, look at what happened by random process. Isn't that inconsistent? Well, let me try to illustrate that with an example. If we randomly picked some letters and we got these three words, what do the words mean? First thing is, in order to interpret the words, you've got to have a language system, and that language system has to have meaning. Those words mean nothing in German. They mean nothing in French. They only mean something in English. And they can mean a lot of different things depending upon the language system. Let me give you an example. This is not blue. This is a blue knot. This is not a blue knot. This is not a knot. You see, it's a matter of interpreting it, and a language system is required to interpret it. In order to have a language system, you've got to have a system to read it. You have to have letters, the raw materials, the media. You've got to have the system, and then you've got to have the intelligence or the interpretation of it. DNA has all three of those. The raw materials, 4 letters, the intelligence, the language system of DNA, and then finally the interpretation of that, because the DNA in your body produces all the metabolism that keeps you alive. And then what I have to say about this is random processes don't generate information. We showed you the slide before of the monkeys typing at the typewriter. Just think about this. You and I sit down at the computer, blindfold ourselves, and bang on the keys. How long is it going to take us to write a program? You and I both know that's a stupid question, right? You're never going to write a program. Why? Because order requires intelligence. And I could demonstrate that the order in DNA requires infinite intelligence to produce it.